more people having a cold. There are tens of thousands of people dying because of pollution every year in the EU. The overall life cycle of an electric vehicle is still more favorable, more efficient. All the rational arguments are for an electric vehicle. But if you zoom out, the overall number of cars might be more important. And I like to have, just as a thought model, I mean, having more people in one car would be a great thing. But then the other dimension is that cars stand 23 hours a day. So they're not Fahrzeuge, they're Stehzeuge. Only 3 of 10 Berliners have a car. When you have congestion, one more lane will fix it, which is proven wrong since decades in research. Everywhere. Anybody in the system has the ability to change things. And that's also my drive personally as a parent or as an activist, or if I don't do it, no one will do it.
Can we really live without cars?
Well,
Florian Kobler is a passionate activist advocating for cities built for people, not cars. Through his work in political campaigns, he challenges how we view cars and rethink urban design. As the host of the podcast Ring Frei, a podcast that questions the status quo of mobility, Florian pushes for a future with better public spaces, bike lanes, and pedestrian-friendly cities. My name is Luardo, and this is the Guten Tag Podcast. Let's dive in. We want to thank one of our sponsors for supporting this podcast. WunderTax is a platform that makes your tax declaration in Germany easy. Try it out for free and only submit if you're fully satisfied. Visit gutentag.wundertax.de and give it a try. Now, without further ado, let's start with the conversation. Florian Kobler, welcome to the show.
thank you very much.
Thank you for coming here.
To be here. Maybe just to add to that little CV, because you said Klimaliste, that was the party, the small party I worked for the electorate campaign in the last repeat election in Berlin. And right after it, I also was running the campaign for the referendum of Klimaneustadt, which was that 2030 climate neutrality people referendum, because it was quite an impressive and interesting experience. And it also got me in close contact with a lot of the community that is fighting for climate measures and a more sustainable and resilient city in Berlin.
And also you're the host of a podcast, Ring Frei.
That's correct, yes.
Where does the name come from?
So Ring Frei is the podcast of the Citizens Initiative for the Volksentscheid Berlin Autofrei, so the people's referendum to reduce the number of cars in the city of Berlin. Autofrei is a bit misleading. We're actually pushing a bill, or we have written a law, if that was voted through, the number of cars in the S-Bahn Ring, hence the name Ring Frei. In the within the S-Bahn Ring of Berlin, you would not anymore have the priority of private cars. You would have the priority of pedestrians, cyclists, public transportation, security services, delivery, craftspeople, etc., and mobility impaired people. They would all have guaranteed right to use whatever vehicle they need. But the average person, let's say the lawyer with his little bag who's driving to the office, he would be able to take the bus, walk, take the bike. So the idea is to put the whole legislation from the head to its toes and to basically make those commutes that are necessary and give them an easier access. And for example, for craftspeople, it's a huge problem that they don't find parking. They would have a much easier time to find parking. The firefighters wouldn't be stuck in traffic. And quite honestly, no one else would be stuck in traffic because the overall number of cars would be strongly reduced. And we are, a number of volunteers from that initiative are running that podcast, Ring Frei. And we've had 35 episodes. I'm sure we can link it in the show notes, where we have tried to basically approach the topic of mobility in Berlin from any possible different angle, because it's very fascinating. Once you really start digging, you understand. I mean, first of all, the topic means going from A to B. Then it means going from A to B safely. You can look at traffic violence, accidents, whatever. Then it means, or another aspect is health, because pollution, congestion, and for example, what we have right now, I'm a little stuffed up too, is contributes to Atemwegserkrankungen. So more people having a cold. There are tens of thousands of people dying because of pollution every year in the EU. And so, just another angle. We just had a firefighter on our show who had the security aspects and that angle, and was quite outraged that people get all heated about, not enough room for the ladders of the firefighters all of a sudden on Kantstraße in Charlottenburg, even though, supposedly because the new bike path doesn't leave enough room for the firefighters. But then you're like, okay, if that's a problem here, it's a problem in the entire city. And no one ever says anything about it. It's only a problem when there is a bike lane. It's like, ugh. And so this podcast was a really interesting journey so far, because it really, pieced together pieces of a puzzle where you all of a sudden in the end, you're like, whoa, this is really, we're like in a Kafka-esque nightmare where we're caught. And like this example with the firefighters, we're finding ever more excuses to uphold a system that's really toxic, that's really hurting us, humans. But we're finding all these excuses to keep it running, or to even, keep it running even stronger, building more roads and so on and so forth.
Yeah, well, like the example with electric cars. They say, okay, let's build electric cars to reduce emissions. And then they say, yeah, but the batteries cause more emission, or you still need to build a car. And it's like finding these excuses not to move a step forward. So
right,
let's keep stuff like the way they are.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating point. For instance, electric vehicles. There, and you need to look at the, all the different aspects. So pollution, great. Nothing comes out of the exhaust. That's good. But yes, you have other aspects, in the life cycle. So there is also a lot of disinformation, because you understand in Germany, I always say its state goal is that the car industry builds more cars, sells more cars. So whenever it's not surprising that Germany has a lower electric vehicle rate than, let's say, Norway. Yeah. Norway doesn't have a car industry they protect. So, they're happy to innovate and go with a more efficient technology. Germany, as everyone can witness, there is a lot of protectionism, open and disguised, and a lot of lobbying, disinformation. And maybe it's a good moment to say, I may every now and then sound very one-sided. I don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I have a very biased look, especially when I talk about the car industry. It's important to know, though, I'm born in Stuttgart, home of Mercedes, Porsche, Bosch, and so on. I worked at publishers in Stuttgart that does, Auto, Motor und Sport. I worked at Mercedes when I was still in school. I did an internship at BMW. Like, I'm as car infected. I was at car fairs when I was a child. I'm as car infected, and I'm also, I'm fascinated by the technology and so on. Yeah. It's not like I'm
different cars, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sticking with this EV, electric vehicle example, you realize, for example, then, pollution from the exhaust is less of a topic. Life cycle is another. You have to look at the numbers closely. If you're looking at honest numbers, you see, okay, the overall life cycle of an electric vehicle is still more favorable. And the use of energy is way more efficient, obviously. So, all the rational arguments are for an electric vehicle. But then, for instance, we call it Reifenabrieb, the abrasion, I guess it's called in English, of the tires. It's something very underestimated, but there are microplastic rubber particles in the air everywhere, including in unborn, in the blood of unborn children and so on. Is like literally everywhere, because these particles are so small. And in our lungs, they're cancerous, and so on and so forth. So even though it's a different engine, the car still creates very much of the same problems. And so it's important to have that debate about electric vehicles. But if you zoom out, you realize the overall number of cars might be the more important lever. And so looking at, for example, carpooling, people, we have between 1.0 something in commuters and 1.4 average Besetzungsgrad, I don't know the term in English, I guess amount of people in a car.
Yeah.
So the norm is that one person alone drives a car. And that's horrible in terms of efficiency, of use of energy.
Space.
And space, exactly. We have 1.1 or 1.2 million parking lots in Berlin, and that's just the public parking in the streets. That doesn't include the inner courtyard parking or the parking garages, private. It's really the public parking in the streets. And the space is, I did the math because the Senate published a couple months ago, published this number. It equals 4.5 times the Tempelhofer Feld. 4.5 times. The entire Tempelhofer Feld, just parkings.
Okay. Yeah.
Imagine that amount of cars. That is the car fleet of Berlin. And I like to have, just as a thought model, having more people in one car would be a great thing. But then the other dimension is that cars stand 23 hours a day. So they're not Fahrzeuge, they're Stehzeuge. Even at peak hour, they're never more than 10% of the entire fleet rolling.
Yeah.
And that's just mind-boggling. It means that, between 90 and 97% of the cars are not used. Imagine that with the aviation fleet. That
very
all these expensive vehicles are just standing around, or with the cruise ship, or whatever, seafaring vessels fleet. Yeah. No one would have the idea that would be a smart approach. And so, just as I like to have this as a thought experiment. What if the city of Berlin had a contract with, let's say, the devil, Tesla, had 50,000 Teslas for the citizens of Berlin to use, and had an app, let's say the Miles app, that the company that kind of has the biggest distribution
share of the market,
share of the market in sharing cars in Berlin. Something very easy to use. And then, of course, you would have to have something easier for senior citizens, a number where they just call and say, is there a car nearby? Can I access it? You name it. You could find solutions to enable everyone to use the 3 or 4 cars in their street from that city fleet and use it when they need it. So the notion of owning a car, I understand that if you're on a farm in the countryside, we're talking, or even in a village, it's a different story. But even for villages, and there are people who are working on that, and developing villages were like that too. Someone had a car, and of course he was lending it to the entire village. I had Erdal on the show on our podcast last time, who grew up in a village in Turkey without electricity, running water, or cars. The mayor had a car, and that was the one person who would drive you to town when you needed to. So this is how it started. And then it's a story of basically overshoot and overconsumption, because, a lot of the people, I have neighbors that have 2 or 3 cars, 2 people, and some of the cars just stand around. Other people are like in disbelief when you say you pay €20.40 for a public parking for 2 years.
Yeah, it's nothing, yeah.
And if you do the math and go like, okay, what is that per square meter per month? You're in the 1 cent digit. In a place where in the 3rd backyard, an apartment in the 5th floor will cost how much per month per square meter? Like €20 or more?
Yeah.
It's like, this is what I meant with Kafkaesque. Like, we're it's like you're so often, if you really do all the numbers and you look at what we're doing, you're like, how is this possible? We're an intelligent species and we're letting that fly? Really, I'm flabbergasted.
But can we really live without cars?
Well, I wouldn't go, that's not, it's a great question. I don't think it's necessary to go there. It's not my approach, or it wouldn't be the initiative's approach to live without cars. And I think in a
More
rural,
about to rethink the ownership of cars, if we really need it on a daily
and that's where,
basis.
if we're saying ownership of cars, we're talking about the real problem. Because the real problem is that in Germany, the story goes, if we're not fostering the purchase of cars with all the state aid we have, then the economy is going to collapse and we're all going to be poor. That's what we should actually talk about. It's not about what's the most efficient solution for a city to organize themselves and for people to get from A to B. That's what's being sold. And then you have all these, television advertisements where the car is just,
a lifestyle.
You have great music. The streets are always empty, in the beautiful countryside whatsoever. You never, of course, the nuisances of a car are not advertised, and there are many. We can talk about those. But the real question is, what is the economic model behind it? And then, what bullshit are we sold to keep buying more cars? And in a city like Berlin, this is why I am, why I think it's fascinating and important to work on that topic. In a city like Berlin, we have alternatives. We have really good transportation. Only 3 of 10 Berliners have a car. So there is a majority that gets along without cars. To go back to your question, is it life without car possible? Yes. For a lot of people in Berlin, for a majority of people in Berlin, it's possible. But we're talking about Berlin. Berlin is the capital. There was a news article in Die Zeit that called Berlin die Hauptstadt des Autoverzichts. Because it's possible, because the public infrastructure is good enough.
You have car sharing everywhere.
Exactly. And it's relatively easy. It's very spread out. So it's actually, Berlin has long commutes, but it's flat. Stuttgart, for example, where I come from, is more of a challenge. You see people rolling down into the city and then taking the public transportation with their bike up, which can be, smart. And I think that's what we should think more about, is like how to split up commutes into different segments. You can also take a bike to the train, then the train into town, and then micromobility for the last mile. And a lot of people do that. And the Jelby app in Berlin, for example, is a fantastic tool. I mean, there are obviously also, you could say it's just comfort, but people do obviously like their own space. Cars do have, great attributes, of course. Of course, you are, closed off, but that's also part of the problem in a very individualistic society where we don't get to talk to each other already.
Yeah, true. I mean, for example, when sometimes when I take a car and I say, isn't there too much traffic? And it's like, yeah, but at least I'm alone. Yeah. And in the U-Bahn, you might be stuck there with a lot of people. And then sometimes comes a weird person or smells, and at least you're sitting in your car alone and listening to your music. It might take you longer because of the traffic, but you feel like encapsulated.
And so, it's like a fork. And you have to choose. And I mean, it's very important to say, in a city like Berlin, we have the opportunity to choose. In a lot of places in the countryside, you don't. And so that's an important part of the question to, can we live without the car? A lot of people can't, and they're not necessarily happy about it. But in Berlin, this is why I'm active in Berlin, we're kind of seeing that the system has tilted in the other way. It's not a benefit for the people, it's actually hurting the people. And so we have this huge conflict of interest, which you can, for example, see with these TVO, Tangentialverbindung Ost, the big road project in the east of Berlin, and also even more so the A100, the highway that tries to, or where politicians try to basically bring more traffic into Berlin, which of course pisses the people who live in Berlin off because it ruins their life.
And why do they want to do that? I mean, I heard a lot of the protests because it's going to demolish a lot of very legendary clubs from Berlin. It's going to pass.
Yeah. Yep.
What is the real intention to do that? I mean, it doesn't make sense for the citizens, right?
But that's what I mean. It's against the interest of the people who live in Berlin. Yeah. And if you look at the data, I mean, it was the same with the climate neutrality referendum. Mm-hmm. The people who live in the area where this highway is supposed to be built, they voted overwhelmingly for climate neutrality by 2030. Mm-hmm. There is a direct connection. These people understand that politicians want to build a 6 or 8 lane highway through their living room. Yeah. They don't benefit. Even if they're not directly affected, the cars that go through the highway will then, filter into their side streets. And I mean, they have to go somewhere. It's just congestion, bad air. No one wants to noise. Exactly. It's all very lethal. Yeah. So no one wants to have that. And even of course, the value of your property will
decrease.
I mean, the scale is insane. I mean, in the United States, they have, after the war, demolished entire neighborhoods for highways. And guess which neighborhoods those were?
Can't imagine which one.
It was generally
the marginalized people.
The marginalized people, exactly. And they were like, oh, great, we're solving 2 problems in one.
We're getting rid of the marginalized and now we have a highway.
Except the marginalized, they had to go somewhere too. They are either stuck and stayed there or, had to even go into worse environments. And wherever you build a road like that, and that's, where we started with our podcast, there's this guy, Hermann Knoflacher. He's a professor in Vienna who kind of in the 70s already managed to set the city of Vienna on a different track. And he also, taught generations of city builders a different mindset. And he talks about these streets like cuts from surgeons. Mm-hmm. Like the city could be seen like a body and these streets like cut into the body. Because socially, a street like that, and I live on one like that in Charlottenburg, there is a piece, it's near Adenauer Platz, where they built after the war, like they tore down an entire city block and built 2-lane with a 2-lane underground tunnel. So it's 8 lanes, in a smallish neighborhood. I mean, the regular road, 2 cars could pass, and they now made 8 lanes. And this is just a short segment because they didn't complete this gigantic project of the Autogerechte Stadt that they pursued at the time. It does lead to, like, my kids can't go to the other side of the street. You have to walk like 10 minutes around. And so it really cuts through neighborhoods and it separates people and it prevents social contact, social interaction. Like what you experience on a market where people talk to each other, exchange ideas or have fights or whatever, that doesn't happen anymore.
Berliner Straße, like in Wilmersdorf, also the same problem. You need to find a bridge because it's like a lot of lanes and the underground tunnel.
Yeah. As a historian, it's totally fascinating. So as a historian, there are a few things around street size that are very fascinating. So there is in Paris, in the 1848 riots, Paris Commune and so on. Mm-hmm. Afterwards, they had this city program that's called the Haussmannisation, after Haussmann, who basically cut away blocks and made the streets wider so they couldn't be barricaded. And they did that in Berlin as well. For example, what is it called near Schloss Charlottenburg? Bismarckstraße. It's the most insane street. It literally, we did it on the podcast once. We measured it. And it's insane. They took an entire city block from Berlin. And this is not just a house. This is the house, the courtyard, and the back house. They took that away to build just street so that the emperor at the time could pass unaffected from the plebs. So the reason that a lot of the Berlin city streets are wide and wider than in small towns is that a lot of the infrastructure was built afterwards. Berlin, spread out in the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. And a lot of the streets were already built wider. And now what you need to know, and that's back to Hermann Knoflacher, the researcher, who was a scholar of Carl von Frisch, evolutionary biologist who discovered the dance of the bees and so on. They did research and found out that humans evolutionarily are made to perceive their environment in walking speed. And so if a street in a rolling car, in a vehicle, gets very wide, we tend to go faster, unconsciously. And if you narrow the road, we unconsciously go very slow. And so, you had this question, why do we still build streets? Because in a very naive fashion, and this is what's still prevailing in Germany, streets are seen as a problem solver when you have congestion. One more lane will fix it, which is proven wrong since decades in research. Everywhere. Everyone who seriously works with traffic and infrastructure knows that it's the opposite. You build one more lane for a few months, it'll go a little faster, and then people realize, there is a niche, you can go a little faster.
It brings
and then
more
it brings back back the congestion, and then they will build a new lane, and it's the same thing again. And now, as I said, as a historian, what's fascinating, this approach after the war, Autogerechte Stadt, to build a fully car-centric infrastructure. For example, this horrible accident with that concrete truck a few years ago, where a biker got killed, is on one of these stretches of a very wide street that was supposed to be this super highway all in the city center. And these concepts go back to the Nazi era. Like, a lot of the concepts were these mixed neighborhoods were looked like vermin. It needed to be cleaned out. Like, very inhumane concepts of, let's get this orderly. Let's have the machine have priority. And like the entire law in Germany, Straßenverkehrsordnung, stems from that time, is a Nazi approach to how to organize public life in a city mostly. And this is very underappreciated. And then, what I said, the Autogerechte Stadt, why did it not go further? The reason is very simple. The cities understood that it's too expensive to even upkeep all this infrastructure. We have Breitenbachplatz in Wilmersdorf, where they're tearing down a whole viaduct because, they never continued and finished that highway.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, it's, the city doesn't have the money to keep it from falling down. So they have to dismantle it. And already since the 1970s, I think the tipping point where it was the oil crisis, it's clear that the cities don't have the money to upkeep this infrastructure. And so, in a way, what was built until then was stopped. And the big projects have been thrown out the window. But this approach of, we still have to build more in order to, on the one hand, deal with congestion, and on the other hand, deal with or give the opportunity of further economic growth, because that's the narrative about the A100 and the TVO. We need economic growth, and we need more trucks to go through, and so on and so forth. When I look at the whole debate, and when I just think critically, about why they're doing it, how they're doing it, when there are so many arguments against it, not to mention the climate facts, for instance, because we have the same debate in Berlin about, do we build a Straßenbahn or do we build an underground
U-Bahn, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the street level streetcar is super efficient. It's like 300 people ballpark per vehicle. So you need relatively few drivers. You build it very fast because it just needs the tracks on a street that's already there and a few stations. So it's cheaper, much cheaper, and it goes much faster to build it. And the M10 to Turmstrasse in Moabit, for instance, is a really success. Like, they built it.
But it took a while because I lived there and I was thinking, oh my God, how long it takes
Yeah, it still took a while, but the U-Bahn will take 20 years, and it will cost...
Like the extension of the U5.
Exactly.
That was in construction when I came to Berlin in 2010, and I think just a couple of years ago it was finished, and I was thinking, how long does this take?
And this, I mean, just so we have it clear, the U-Bahn takes much longer, is much more expensive, and climate facts needs so much more concrete that, again, life cycle, it takes ages for it to make up the effect of, it's good that people use public transportation against, what it takes to build this. And this is all public knowledge. People know this, which leads me to, and this now gets party politics. If you look at what the parties favor and do, and we're talking in Berlin about SPD and CDU, it's very clear. I mean, there is no real... I mean, there are two reasons why you would want to favor a U-Bahn over a Straßenbahn. Number one, you want to favor cars. You don't want to take away a lane from them.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they build a Straßenbahn in Berlin, they design them so that they're still stuck behind car traffics, which no city planner in the world would do, except here, because cars have to have the priority. It's insane, really insane. So that's the number one reason if you build a subway instead of a streetcar. The number two reason, like I'm saying it very straight, is corruption. I'm not sure, if I could hold that argument, but there has to be some tit for tat between these parties and the construction companies. I mean, they're in bed with each other one way or another. Corruption is probably too hard of a word, but there is a
conflict
system
of interest.
Conflict of interest. Let's call it that way, because it might just be that these parties go to that these companies go to the parties and say, "Look, we have so many employees, and we will really speak out for you when you do something for us." There is a podcast that's called Teurer Fahren. That's about the big train project between Berlin and Munich. It's an excellent podcast. I can only recommend. It's 3 or 4 episodes, and it's at the time of Helmut Kohl and Volker Wissing. No, not Volker Wissing, sorry. Matthias Wissmann was the German traffic minister. He later then became the head of the Car Builders Association, funnily, which is a totally normal thing in Germany. Which is why I call the traffic minister usually gasoline minister. He is in that podcast a lot, and they keep talking about this train connection between Berlin and Munich was important. It was about the German reunification. It had to be done that way. The odd thing, what this podcast is about, is why did it go through Erfurt, which had like 40 tunnels and viaducts through the rocky area, Erzgebirge, with a lot of valleys and stuff to cover, when it could have gone through Halle, which has many more inhabitants. It's the whole area, Cottbus and so on, where you have political problems now because people feel disenfranchised. So the train tracks could have gone through there, serviced many more people, and cost a fraction. And in the entire show, I challenge the listeners to listen to the podcast. The one word that is not mentioned is corruption. Mm-hmm. But there is not one reason given, not one plausible reason why this track goes through Erfurt rather than the other area. And that's how it was eventually built. Okay. And that's how, I would argue the political system with the industry is in an unhealthy marriage, because it doesn't service the real need of the people, or at least of the majority of the people. It serves party interest and those who have influence in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a place where you have access to mobility, is having a car or using a car the whole time doesn't become a thing of a necessity. I have been when I'm at my parents-in-law, I don't know if I told you that in my first call, but the first time, or not the first time, but one of the couple of times ago, I think last year, I wanted to go to Stuttgart. Mm-hmm. And I was trapped in the village where actually comes a train, and the train just didn't come. And I thought, Then I go to the bus stop. It was supposed to come a bus, and it didn't. It just didn't come. And I was like, I feel trapped in here.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's a really good example, and it is like that. And so it's for me very important to separate these things in the discussion, because other actors will try to, will inject exactly these kind of stories as a, Totschlagargument, and to also rile up people against a cause like this. And you're constantly comparing apples to oranges. It's a different story. There is a reason we start in Berlin, because in Berlin it's possible and the majority already does it.
Yeah.
And, my idea is that if we do it more, and if we get to do it more successfully, like in many other cities, and Paris is the best example, it will have ripple effects, and other areas will follow. But it's not about us trying to take away someone in the rural Stuttgart area away their car. I go there. I grew up there. It's disheartening to see how many cars are parked in these tiny streets, because they were all not built for so much blech traffic. And, I suffer for the people who have to walk and drive around those obstacles every time and all the day, and that's their life. It just, it hurts me, but that's okay. We're not going to change that around from now to tomorrow, but you have to start somewhere, and here you can start. And I think what's really important to understand is that, it makes a difference, because you said before, it's comfortable to take a car, and it's a fork. People can take more individual cars. Then we have a lot of negative effects, the social, the health. You'll get more obese, less active, and so on and so forth. But also, as always, of course, it's a decision on the investment side. If we favor, or if we support, like the Car in Berlin government does, if we want more streets, if we put our money into more car infrastructure, which they do, they want to spend 340 million for this TVO out of the city budget, because the federal government said we're not funding it anymore, or we're not funding it. So all of a sudden, instead of paying 30 million, which Berlin thought, they have to pay 340 million. And they still want to build that road, even though they're cutting away, they want to close theaters, they want to, they're cutting away everything, everywhere, on a city that's already hurting the public schools, for instance, and so on. They're still putting their money into that one road. This is what has to get people really outraged. And to make them understand, if you put that money into streetcars, for instance, that could be a whole network that could, then have ripple-on effects, because more people would be willing to take public transportation. The streets would be freer. You could build more bike lanes. Bike lanes, a total culture war topic, but they're cheap. And a city like Copenhagen, they introduced bikes and the whole bike infrastructure because they did the math. Because 1 kilometer driven by a car costs the city 20 cents, but 1 kilometer rode on a bike brings the city 30 cents. Ballpark figures. I can send you the links from their Chamber of Commerce. Because of health effects, because of, all these kind of positive economic effects. But that's the kind of data that is just not discussed in Germany.
And as you said, the parking for street parking, like 2 years for 20 euros is very cheap. Also, the Kfz Steuer is also relatively cheap. It's just 170, I think, per year, which is not a lot, I would say. And a fine in the street by not paying the parking space, 10 euros, 15 euros sometimes. So it's like there's a lot of incentive for people to use more their car instead of like not doing it, because cities like Copenhagen, I think they have high taxes, the streets are small, so there's also a lot of incentive of actually it's not that convenient. But there's also examples here in Germany, like Tübingen. I don't know if you have been there recently. They have built like tons of bike lanes, and everything is like super bike friendly there.
Yep. Yeah, it's a student town, mid-size, and a very progressive mayor, not an undisputed one, but progressive in that sense that he looks at those numbers and puts the money where the it's also Swabia, people can calculate. It's actually quite interesting how many sustainable infrastructure projects are taking hold there.
Mm-hmm.
Because when Swabians understand when you can make more money or
they're
lose
very
more
like,
money.
where can I save here?
Relatively number driven and sober people. And so I like that approach over all this ideology outcry.
Yeah, I mean, Germany is a country which is very car production dependent, and actually one of the problems that we're seeing now in the economy is because of the decline on sales from German cars, especially to China, and how the Chinese have developed better in the production of electric cars in comparison to the German industry.
Just to make that case as well, I think it's called innovator's dilemma. That it's the Nokia story that you're the front runner and you get protectionist and you're hesitant to cannibalize yourself, and that makes you weak and makes you sleepy, and that's exactly what has happened to the German car industry. And I don't really see how they can pull out of there. And the problem is that the reaction from the politicians is, to even try to protect them more. And that's why we have this whole screwed system where subsidies are being, supposedly they're leftist and unacceptable. But if you look at the real subsidies we have, they're all for fossil fuels and for the fossil fuel industry. And suddenly they're totally okay. They're unnegotiable. So, we have a real integrity problem in Germany.
There's always the double moral. If subsidies are wrong, if they are given to the poor people, they're wrong. You're a Marxist, you're a socialist. But if these subsidies are given to Elon Musk, then it's like, innovation, liberalism, libertarian, whatever. But a lot of people and the economy of the country depend on the Verbrenner industry, like the combustion cars. And they would say, okay, but we need to protect them, so we cannot make just this transition to electric cars because a lot of jobs would be lost. But as everything continues, as China becomes more innovative in electric cars, now it is outcompeting the German industry. And the result is that the car manufacturers cannot sell so many cars. It makes them less competitive. And at the end, they need to lay off people. So the thing that you wanted to save in the first place is what you end up losing at the end.
Exactly. I would argue that too. I can see that the way we try to protect those operations is actually hurtful and is not making much sense, and in the long run will fail, probably cause greater failing, because then the companies will really fold rather than transform. And there was, I think it was Edzard Reuter, the head of Mercedes, who had a notion of developing the company more towards a service-oriented mobility company rather than a car manufacturer. That was at the beginning of the digital era. And then, customer shareholder value basically was ousted. Long story short, but it's not like there weren't other approaches or that other approaches wouldn't be thinkable. They're just very painful. They're on the short term less profitable, but they might make you perhaps survive on the long term. It's a whole topic we haven't spoken about. It's probably a good mention, because I have kids and am active at their school with traffic as well. But also, as I said, air pollution, the stress from noise, and the poorest people live on the busiest streets. So this is a fundamental social problem. It's the weakest and the social least favorable who pay the hardest price.
Actually, the reason why we don't let kids just run around in the streets alone, it's not because of, let's say, crime or weird people. It's because of cars. That's the first thing that you're afraid as a parent.
Yes.
Be careful of cars. You cannot just run away.
Yeah.
Cars is the thing that you're mostly afraid of.
Yes, absolutely. You don't let your kids do anything alone. We don't let them ride to school with a bike. Because there are some parts have bike lanes, some don't. The car drivers in Berlin are super aggressive. You couldn't even be sure that they're safe on a bike lane. because they're unprotected. People park on the bike lane. Like the potential number of conflict that your kid could encounter in really dangerous traffic. And then, on a street where there is 30, people will ride 50. On a street where there is 50, people will ride 70 because the police doesn't control. There are no sanctions, or when they control, the tickets are thrown in the gutter.
Yeah, or they're very, very low.
Yeah, very low. Exactly. Then the punishments are very low. Like the entire system is inhumane. It's inhumane, and that's why the weakest have to suffer, and why ever more parents drive their kids to school with a car. So I had, for 3 years or so, I've helped with other parents lobby for a school zone in front of the school of my kids in Wilmersdorf. And that whole, it accumulated into a whole, even a public outcry. We had a cover story in BZ and Bild last November, because it was finally then put into effect.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning, we were just doing demonstrations, one-day events where we then blocked off the street for the kids to experience the street without cars and to develop a sense how it would be, how it would feel. And they could come out and paint on the street and just occupy the space and feel safe. And we did this a few times. And then we got more and more political, went into the local assembly. And then the politician in charge made a statement how he's a super fan of these school streets. And we're like, okay. And then he was like, but the parents are the problem. They drive their kids into the school. If they could, they would drive them into the schoolroom with their cars. And I'm like, no, we're the parents. We're here. Yeah. You just said you're a fan of the school streets. Does it mean you promise us now that we can have that school street? And he said yes. Like, we had him caught publicly.
Okay.
Then, with a second initiative, we went to the head of the street planning authority, the Straßenverkehrsbehörde. He came to the school. He looked at the mayhem we have there every morning, because parents come, dump their kids in the middle of the street. The kids run around the car without looking left and right. They could be run over. The parents will do a U-turn in front of the school. They could run over other kids. People honking. I've videotaped this numerous times. It's really mayhem. And he looked at that and he was really shocked, where I could see he had never been there before. It's, it doesn't seem to be part of his job profile to go to the pain points in the city. And so he was there the first time, was like, yeah, I'm thinking about doing a one-way street. So now we had two competing suggestions, and there was email exchange, and I tried to keep lobbying for that school street, ideally on top of a one-way street, because the sidekick of that street official was like, well, one-way street, on the one hand, it's good. On the other hand, it can lead to people driving even faster. Because remember, bigger street, wider street can accelerate the speed.
Yeah, you have this thing in Berlin, and I have been questioned by some people who come sometimes to visit me. Like, is this street really like
one way
or two way? Because it is so narrow, because you have sometimes the cars parking on the side, and then you have two cars are supposed to come.
Yeah.
And but I think what they want is that you don't go so fast. So if a car is coming in the other direction, you will drive slow. It's an
that's
incentive.
One means to keep the traffic slow.
Yeah.
Then that street over there is relatively wide, cars parked on either side, and two streets that can cars that can comfortably go. But if you take away one direction, and the classic in Berlin is then that bikes are still allowed, but only cars go only one way, then all of a sudden you have a very wide lane, and cars will inevitably then go faster.
By this effect you said.
And that's
the wider it is, the faster you go.
Exactly. And so that's why we kept lobbying for the school street. And then there were a number of further interactions. The politician, that street authority guy, promised us for the end of the school holiday that they would have that one-way street built. And they work together. It's not like they work against each other. He's a subordinate of that politician. The day on Sunday, when the last Sunday of the school holiday, the next Monday was the day we were going to go to school. We got an email from the politician saying that he canceled all the planning for the one-way street because of an email I sent earlier lobbying for that school street, basically blaming us for his inactivity.
Okay.
Insane. Instead, in front of the school was a gigantic construction site from the school authority because they are now renovating the sanitary tracts. Unrelated, but the construction site was such that the entire walkable sidewalk in front of the school was fenced off. Literally, the entire remaining pedestrian space was blocked with these panels.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, we had promised a safe solution for our kids. It got canceled the day before we would have asked really annoyed questions. And instead, we had a crazy construction site that you couldn't even cross the street anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of all of that, before the holiday, there was another public debate in the city council where a politician had brought forward our concern for a school street and was ruled over. And everyone said it's already taken care of by administrative action. It's already taken care of. And they were all clapping each other's shoulders of how much they care about school street safety.
Mm.
And we come after 2 months of summer holidays, and not only is nothing done, but it's made much worse. That's the reality of Berlin. And that is, in that email where he said he hasn't stopped planning, he was at the same time, he was like, but you can have the school street as long as you're doing all the work. And that is where we then entered in this dialogue about doing this school street by parents putting up signs and blocking off the area in front of the school. And a long negotiation process, and we kept pushing for a practical solution. And at the end of the day, we got, there was a handover of material, and we stand there and they come with 700 kilograms of street signs. They have these super heavy feet, so they don't fall if there is wind. And they're like, yeah, and by the way, you have to carry those every day 300 meters to the one side of the city block and the other side of the city block, and then bring them back to the school, back and forth every day, 700 kilograms. And we were like, okay, is this for real? You must be joking. After phone call of saying we need a practical solution. And at the same time, I didn't want to just, give up. So we were like, okay, we're taking this material and we're like, but we're going to have some fun. And we called the press and they came with television teams. The journalists called me and were like, this is a joke. This is not real.
Yeah.
But it was real. And they filmed us and it quickly escalated. And I mean, I like to illustrate another aspect because it really shows, I think, where the problem is, if the fundamental problem is. So in front of that school, there is about a 50-meter stretch of, next to the sidewalk, a parking area where cars are parked. But they have street signs up already since decades where in school hours, it's actually, it has to be kept free. It's an absolutes Halteverbot. So, like for loading. And it would be the natural kiss and go zone, so to speak. It has always been there, but there are always cars parked.
Just never controlled by the
No one
Ordnungsamt.
ever controls it. I had the head of the street authority, the guy I spoke before, and I had the head of the Ordnungsamt. And I posed them the question. I'm like, do you see the stretch of the Parkverbot?
Yeah.
Like we're standing 20 meters in front of the sign and they're like, which sign? What are you talking about? And I'm like, look up there. Because it's a pole with like 5 signs on top of each other. And each sign has like a descriptive text underneath.
Yeah.
What time it applies to and what condition it applies to. Like that's already the first, that's Germany. Like having 15,000 signs. No one looks at the signs. Even the authorities don't look at the signs.
Yeah.
And everyone does what the neighbor does. Someone parks there. He doesn't get into trouble. Well, then I'll just park there as well.
Yeah.
Why can't your authorities manage to have these, this stretch of road free? Oh, and the politician, we asked the same thing. And each of these people gave me like 5-minute speeches of all the reasons why it's not possible. We only have, 4 or 6 or 8 teams for the entire district of the Ordnungsamt people who can write tickets. If they have to stay next to the car until it's towed, it might take up to 2 hours, and they rather walk around and distribute more tickets. The head of the street authority is like, well, I'm going to give this some thought. The next day, the signs were...
They took them off.
They covered them up. That worked. That is the thing that worked. Like taking away a measure that was designed to protect kids is a no-brainer. Took them 5 seconds, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But going into the painful, negotiation of how to push through a law or a regulation that is there to make the life of kids safer is unthinkable. So it is close to unmanageable in many situations and very, very frustrating. And so people in the authorities can very quickly just fall back and say, oh, my hands are tied. Anybody in the system has the ability to change things. And that's also my drive personally as a parent or as an activist or, a citizen. If I don't do it, no one will do it. But as soon as I start doing it, things change. And politicians do move. This whole school street thing would have never happened. Nothing would change in that street without our effort. So, at the same time, it's entirely disheartening because it really lays bare how, the weakest really have a shit card dealt and people really turn their back on these aspects of justice. But once you make it your cause and once you really get on people's backs, you can change things.
All of these stuff there's a lot of burden on bureaucracy. But I have the feeling that the biggest problem is, fines are too cheap.
Yeah.
That's my biggest issue. And I have been fined by parking in the wrong space, either because I didn't see the sign or sometimes are hard to understand. Is it like this side, whatever side? But then it's like the consequences, 10 euros.
Yep.
And how much it costs to pay per hour parking, 4 euros. So a lot of people say, I'm going to gamble it. I'm going to park my car and I'm going to pay my ticket. And if I get fined like 10 euros, is like still cheaper than paying the actual parking ticket.
And it's throughout the entire jurisdiction, even at the top, at the most atrocious acts of violence. There was this accident on what is it called? Invalidenstraße. Exactly. That guy walked free.
Really?
He drove his car with with a seizure or had a seizure, or it's not even clear if he really had it or if he just said he had it.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, he sells these monster SUVs. And he basically afterwards said, I need a stronger car. That's the reality we're dealing with. These people, he killed a grandmother and her grandchild and another person, I think. It's completely
there's still
unbelievable.
flowers there, I think.
There was this other case where a 60-year-old or so drove his car over a red light. It was red 21 seconds, killed a 13 or 14-year-old girl, and got a Bewährungsstrafe. Like, didn't even go to jail. Mm-hmm. And he said in front of his inner eye, the light went green. I mean, and this is Germany. In Italy, for example, you go to jail. I mean, people with a brain in the Netherlands, for example, they've all understood that. They designed their cities so that cars have to go around and you make it faster for everyone else to go through in a direct fashion. And as soon as it's faster to go through by foot or by bike, people use it. And the old assumptions that, all these cars, what's going to happen? As soon as you do it, traffic evaporates. As a little side story from our school street, we counted traffic before and after. And so we have around about 400 or 500 pupils. And we had around very, very rough figure 60 cars in front of the school every morning. So, and people were, I was in a lot of exchange with people. Even parents were like, when I asked them, how many pupils are brought with a car? People were like, maybe 50-50. And if you look at the numbers, if it's 60 cars for 500 pupils, we're talking about 10 to 20%, even if they're, siblings in the cars and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, after we had our school street, there were 20 cars every day. So
you managed to build to make the school street, but you having to move the signs every day.
Right. We did that for a few weeks, and I think the rest of the story is too complicated, but we could prove that it works.
Mm-hmm.
And these 60 people, the politician who said the parents are the problem, 60 cars in the morning are enough to create complete mayhem. It doesn't sound much, but when they start doing U-turns and get stuck on each other, mayhem, super dangerous. 20 cars, we can probably argue those are people who really need to use the car. And they should continue to do so. They should have safe spaces to let off their kids. And once it's organized in a good fashion, this is really viable. But again, like I said in the beginning, it illustrates how the majority already does get along without a car in a city like Berlin. And as soon as you make it a little more difficult, regulate more, make it more expensive, and offer other options, you can still 2/3 of the traffic will still evaporate because people find other solutions.
Yeah.
And so, it is a matter of life and death to innovate our mobility system.
How could you motivate people to become more active in these initiatives?
Yeah, that's I think a really cool question, because when I worked for that climate referendum, we realized that we don't have a lot of traction with expats. But first it sounds logical because expats can't vote. Most will not have a German passport, so you feel excluded.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, a citizens' initiative is a fantastic opportunity to get active and to lobby, because it's your city too, and it's your life as well, obviously. And why should you not lobby for a change, even though you can't vote? Because you can be part of the initiative, and you can lobby for the change, and you can make the German passport people vote. So I think it's a completely underappreciated aspect. And I mean, for instance, the Volksentscheid Berlin Autofrei, they're super happy. I can say a word also where we're standing in terms of that initiative. And so for the initiative itself, we have now on, I think, April 2 or 3, finally the super important next step, because the politicians in the Senate 3.5 years ago said that our successful first round of the referendum, where we collected enough signatures, that they didn't want to write it into law. And they said they also think it's not constitutional because they felt it was against the right of public property, that, we want to limit the use of privately owned cars in the inner city of Berlin. Our lawyers are quite certain that that's bogus because we have a transition time. It's the same like when they had the diesel legislation for air pollution. So we're actually quite confident they should vote in our favor. But it was a political maneuver because it quieted us for over 3 years. Because also their constitutional court that has to rule over this decision was not equipped. The judges are volunteer judges, and they just didn't renew the judges. Also with the pandemic and so on. And so they sidelined this topic, for them super good. For 3.5 years, they had us out of their feet. Now in April, the court ruling will come, and we expect that it should be in our favor. And then we have about 4 or 5 months to gather or we will prepare for the second round of signatures. And that is something that, for example, volunteers also from other countries could help a great deal, because it needs 170,000 people in Berlin that are eligible to vote, to give their signature that they want this referendum.
Florian Kobler, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for coming to the podcast and explaining your thoughts on mobility, on traffic, on cars, on government, on everything. I hope the people who are listening had a better overview and understanding a little bit of what is happening in the city. The ones who come from more chaotic cities, they still might feel like it's a paradise here, like myself, or people maybe who are coming from Delhi or Istanbul. But it's a great job what you're doing. And if the people want to know more about you, they can follow you, I guess, on LinkedIn.
Yep.
And your podcast, Ring Frei, on
all
every
the
podcast platform.
Exactly. Yes.
Cool. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you very much. Honored to be here.
Great.